welcome to Open Door. Open Door is the historic home of Isabel Howland, who was, along with her aunt Emily Howland, were key figures in the suffrage movement. And we're delighted to have such a wonderful group of people here to celebrate the centennial of women's suffrage this year. And the Open Door home was acquired by the Howland Stone Store Museum several years back, and we've been engaged in an ongoing restoration effort, which is getting close to done. And you are all welcome after the short play we're going to have. You're welcome to take a mini tour of the building. We'll have the west door and the north door open, and we'll ask that people enter via the west door and then go out the north door, so we don't have too much mixing. We won't be giving full tours, but you'll get at least a flavor of the place, and hope you'll be back for additional programs in the future. Also, the main building of the museum, the stone store on the corner, is open, and you're also welcome to do a mini tour there, also entering through the one door, the west door, and then exiting from the east door. Our play today consists of 4 acts, and we are delighted to have with us Isabel Howland, Emily Howland, Harriet May Mills, and we have in one person the editor of the New York Times and a reporter from the New York Times. And we'll get the introductions as the acts unfold. So this first act, the scene is the week after Election Day of 1893, here in Sherwood, New York. In the previous year, women in New York were given the right to vote for local school officials. This is the account of the first votes cast by women in Scipio, as recorded in the minutes of the Sherwood Equal Rights Association.
Election Day has come and gone into history. We would like to tell thee a little about what we did. At our WCTU meeting a few days ago, we decided to go to Scipioville early in the morning to be there at the opening of the polls. My friends, Giles and Fanny Slocum, were first on the ground. Our neighbors, the sisters Simpkin, Charles Comstock and his wife, Alfred and Mrs. Armstrong, and I followed in several vehicles. I was accompanied by Emma Brewster, Minnie Ward, Margaret Stickey, and Dr. Hoag's wife. Benjamin Brewster drove, and he alone was permitted to cast his ballot with none to molest nor to make him afraid. When we reached the hall, we found that no tickets had been received, and so withdrew to warmer quarters to await them, pretty confident, however, that the ballots prepared for the women would not be sent. Last night's paper informed us that Nelson J. Adams and the other Republican candidate for school commissioner had got Judge Rumsey to put an injunction on the county clerk to restrain him from sending our ballots. After much standing around with no one to tell us anything, I entered the enclosure, walked forward to the polling place, and asked a ticket to vote under the law of '92. A stony reply, "We have none." Then I will prepare my own and vote it. You cannot. An injunction has been served upon us, restraining us. I will vote by oath or affirmation. You must take it that way. They refused. After saying a little, I said, I demand then that a list of the women who have come to vote and have been defrauded by this despicable trick shall have their names listed and forwarded with the votes. This we did and came home excited and dissatisfied. Pretty soon, in flew Mrs. Hogue, saying that women were voting in Poplar Ridge and Venice. To be sure, I telephoned and verified the statement. Then Isabel and I besought her father to go and to talk to the board and tell them that they could safely allow us to swear in our votes.
Father and I started for Scipioville after dinner. We found the polls quiet. Voters had not begun to come, and only the board were in the hall. They looked preternaturally solemn as Father motioned us to seats within the rail and went up to them asking what the difficulty was in receiving women's votes. They said that they had been forbidden by an injunction. That was the beginning of a long discussion with much reading of the law upon both sides. Long before the discussion was over, men had come into the hall and stood around listening. It was very still. Fanny and I sat there, silently waiting. At last, Father came and asked us if we wished to swear in our votes. He said we could swear or we could affirm. I said we wished to swear. We went forward and stood before the board. George Hoxie read the oath with trembling voice. We were handed some tickets which Father had prepared. We retired to the booths to write the name of Rosa A. Thomas upon them. We deposited them and walked out. The whole affair was as solemn as a funeral. Passing the hotel, the men standing upon the porch asked if we had voted, and finding that we had, they dashed off to the telephone to telephone the good news to Sherwood in order that the others might come up.
I rushed about the neighborhood, got the load together, and we were off to the polling place for the second time. The vehicles went and came until nearly sunset. If the afternoon had been longer, our vote would have been stronger. I am sorry that there was not time for William to go to Scipio Center and change the tide there. Margaret Hickey regretted it deeply. She was at her sister's on Sunday and found her and her husband all enthusiasm. They had registered the women largely, and all meant to vote. The husband was ready to offer an answer to the often heard question, who will take care of the baby while the woman votes? He was going early to the polls. After his return, he was to mind the 6-week-old baby, and his wife was to go twice with loads of neighboring women. In Union Springs, Mrs. Sherman and Mrs. Allman have devoted all their spare time to registering and house-to-house visiting. Many women also registered in Weedsport and Moravia.
Our second act is set at the Suffrage Committee of the New York State Constitutional Convention on June 7, 1894, the Assembly Chamber in Albany. In a massive effort, suffragists lobbied to delete the word male from the proposed Constitution. They presented 5,000 petitions with 330,000 names from all over the state. I now introduce to you Miss Emily Howland to speak on behalf of the Cayuga County Women's Suffrage Association in the 26th District.
Mr. Chairman and gentlemen of the committee, in the community which is my home, the men, as well as the women, believe in the enfranchisement of our half of humanity. Could they do otherwise if they believe this axiom of our government? Taxation without representation is tyranny. You and all of us have been familiar with this statement of a great principle of our lives. We have been taught that in union there is strength. Have we a true union? Have we a representative government when one half of the people have no voice in it? We come with our petitions and our appeals asking that you mold a constitution for our state consistent with its profession. That our government be no more false to its faith, and that justice henceforth be enthroned as law. We hear doubts as to the expediency of this reform. Was ever a people ruined by justice? Has a nation ever prospered by trying to do what seemed to be expedient instead of what was eternally right? Brothers of the Empire State, in the words of one of our poets, I would say, the ages plead, past and present in undertone. Go, put your creed into your deed. No longer speak with double tongue.
Before we start Act 3, I omitted to give the name of the play. This is The Fight for Women's Suffrage in Sherwood, a reader's theater compiled from primary source material by Larry B. Bell. Act 3, Scene 1. The scene is New York City, May 5th, 1912, the day after a massive suffrage parade on Fifth Avenue, which included Emily, Isabel, and others from Cayuga County. The New York Times ran an editorial entitled The Uprising of the Women. And here's the editor of the New York Times.
The parade on Fifth Avenue last evening will be discussed from various points of view. Possibly 10,000 women of various ages, many of them young and personable, all surely representative of good types of womanhood, for they were obviously healthy and presumably intelligent. Most of the comment will be humorous but amiable. Men generally view the women's suffrage movement calmly, seeming not to care much whether or not women get the right to vote, and heeding little the consequences of the social revolution which would surely result from the triumph of the present agitation. A few men believe that the right of suffrage should be extended forthwith to the women. Our observation does not justify the inference that these are wise and thoughtful men. The situation is dangerous. We often hear the remark nowadays that women will get the vote if they try hard enough and persistently. And it is true, they will get it and play havoc with it for themselves and for society. If the men are not firm and wise enough, and it may well be said, masculine enough to prevent them. The agitation has been on foot for many years. One does not need to be a profound student of biology to know that some women, a very small minority, have a natural inclination to usurp the social and civic functions of men. But that is not true of a majority of the women in yesterday's parade. Their adherence to the cause is largely factitious, born of much agitation and false theorizing. If they are granted the right to vote, they would demand all that the right implies. It is not possible to think of women as soldiers and sailors, police patrolmen, or firemen. Although voters ought to fight if need be. But they would serve on juries. They would elect themselves, if they could, to executive offices and judgeships. Many of them are looking forward to an apportionment of high offices between the sexes. Now, this may seem preposterous to some of the men who choose to smile complacently at the aggressiveness of the women's rights adherents. But it is true. It is a state of things these men will have to cope with before they die if they do not arouse themselves and do their duty now.
In response to this editorial, the president of the New York State Women's Suffrage Association, Harriet May Mills, sent a response as a letter to the editor. Harriet was Isabel Howland's classmate, fellow suffragist, and close friend. Her letter to the New York Times was dated May 19, 1912.
The advocates, excuse my mess, the advocates of a monocracy are alarmed at the uprising of the women. Solemn warnings are provoked, and a call to arms for all men to rise and assert their authority against votes for women is sounded from the ramparts of conservatism. England was once alarmed at the uprising of the colonists. She, too, was sure that she was fitter to govern us than we were to govern ourselves. The uprising is not new. It is simply manifest in a new fashion and by a hitherto subject class. The question involved is greater than sex, race, creed, or color. The thousands of women who marched up Fifth Avenue were pleading for their own freedom. But they were at the same time marching for the principle of democracy and so for the freedom of all. That principle has developed slowly among the peoples of the earth, but it has grown wondrously within the last century. Shall this movement toward democracy be confined to men? This is no more possible than to limit social, educational, or industrial progress. But distrust and fear protest, as they have ever done in the past. Gentlemen, cry out in terror that if women voted, homes would be abandoned. Can a woman take care of a house and vote? Be not alarmed. She has performed both these duties for over 40 years in certain quarters of the globe. Neither the home, the state, nor the woman has suffered in consequence. Why not look at facts and abandon worn-out theories? Again, our opponent fears that men will cease to respect women when they vote. We suffrage advocates have more faith in man's humanity to woman. We know that it cannot be so easily destroyed. Then there's the fear of woman herself. She thinks herself so bad, so unfit to help make laws for herself and her children, that she begs not to be free. She says she is comfortable and would not be disturbed. Can a woman grow and shirk her responsibilities to the state? Do her duties as a mother stop with motherhood? Is she not bound to protect her child from bad environment and from bad legislation? Above all, is it fair to so overburden man and to force him to legislate for women and children as well as for himself? Even though he be as fully competent as he often assures us he is to understand every need of woman and protect her wherever she may be, he should have the help and cooperation of the other half of humanity in his work of regeneration. Whenever those who oppose women's suffrage discuss the home, they divorce it from politics. But practically, it is in politics and cannot be divorced. Since politics must be in the home, why not put the home into politics? The call is clear to those who listen, and an ever-increasing army of women is recruiting for the high service to humanity which the possession of the ballot will enable them to perform more fully.
The New York Times reporter interviewed Emily Howland just before her 100th birthday.
With a strong belief that the world is progressing toward better and higher ideals, Miss Emily Howland, the Dean of New York State Women Educators, is today quietly preparing at her home in this little village of Sherwood to celebrate tomorrow her 100th birthday. Miss Howland mellowed tolerance and a firm faith that modernity is advancing in the right direction. Miss Howland,